Hey guys, we're backing in with history. We're on chapter 9, Days of a Knight. So this whole chapter is going to be about the life of a knight and what it was like. So a knight in shining armor. Close your eyes. Imagine a line of knights on horseback marching out of a castle across a drawbridge to fight an enemy. It's a bright sunny day, but their armor glints in the sunshine, creating a dazzling sight. Knights were highly trained soldiers who served a particular noble or lord as well as the king. They defended land, castles, and people. Knights rode on horses and were usually in position of leadership on the battlefield. In military terms, a group of knights could change the outcome of a battle. Many brave and successful knights gained land and power. Over time, stories about knights, good and bad, became the subject of many songs in the Middle Ages. And armor is the metal outer covering worn to protect the body in battle. So this is a picture of knights defending a castle in the Middle Ages. So you can see the knights in their metal armor and the castle in the background. How did a boy become a knight? What was the knight's training like? What did knights do when they weren't fighting battles? Read on to find out. Pages and squires. Most knights were the sons of noblemen. They began training to become knights when they were even younger than you are now. When a lord's son was 7 or 8 years old, he was sent away from his home in a castle or manor to live with a relative or overlord, the person who had granted his father a fief. Why was he sent away? In his new home, he would learn to become a knight. The training took many years. In the first stage of training, the young boy served as a page boy. A page boy had to wait on tables and learn the proper manners of a nobleman. Horse riding skills were also very important. Pages practiced their riding skills all the time. Pages also had to become skilled with a sword as well as other weapons. At first, they learned to fight with fake swords. When a page was about 12, he would become a squire. A squire was a personal servant to a particular knight. He went everywhere with the knight. He cleaned the knight's armor and weapons and cared for his horse. One of the most important jobs was to help the knight get into his heavy armor. So you can see in this picture is a picture of a page boy waiting on tables. Becoming a knight. Depending on his rank, the squire might be knighted any time between the ages of 16 and 20. Sometimes a young man who was a member of the highest level of the nobility was knighted at an early age. Normally, a young man was knighted in a solemn ceremony. He stayed up all night praying that he would be a worthy knight. Then he would be presented with spurs, a sword, a shield, and a helmet. His sponsor, usually the lord who had taken him in as a page, would tap him lightly on the shoulder with a sword and dub him Sir something or another. Not all knights were born into noble families. The rank of a knight was one of the few positions of nobility that the commoner could hope to attain. Since nobles were usually desperate for brave fighting men, a soldier showed bravery in battle would usually be knighted as a reward. So what role did knights play in the Middle Ages? So knights were first and foremost soldiers. They were mounted on horses and they fought for their lord or king. Because of their important role in warfare, they became the focus of songs and many stories celebrated their heroism. How did one become a knight in the Middle Ages? So they began training as page boys at the age of 7 or 8, and they waited on noblemen, learning the manners of horseback riding skills and sword work. And then after they were a page, they would become a squire. And a squire was a personal servant to the knight. Everywhere the knight went, the squire went with him. He was there to clean his sword, his armor, and help the knight get into the armor. And he also looked after the horses. So let's read about the life of a knight. An armored knight on horseback was a great fighting machine. Arrows from enemy archers could bounce off the steel plates. The armor also protected him from the enemy's sword and lance. And a lance is a long weapon with a pointed metal tip used by horsemen when charging an opponent. In the early Middle Ages, armor was made of sheets of chainmail, metal rings, reinforced with plates of steel in key areas. A shirt of chainmail weighed about 25 pounds. Under the mail, the knight wore a shell of thick, hard leather. By 1400, chainmail was replaced by hinged and fitted steel plates that covered the knight from head to foot. The suit of armor could easily weigh as much as 65 pounds. It was not easy to move around in these metal suits. That's why knights needed squires to help them prepare for battle. However, once on horseback, the knight was a dangerous soldier. So, how did a squire become a knight? So, squires became knights in their late teens, and they were generally from a higher noble family. They went through a ceremony where they were presented with their armor and weapons, and where they prayed to be a worthy fighter. The squire's sponsor would name him Sir, and then to give the name afterwards. And then during wartime, this process would generally be much quicker. So who was able to become a knight in the Middle Ages? So in the Middle Ages, knights were typically from a noble family, but a commoner could also become a knight if he was an exceptionally skilled soldier. So it wasn't only just for the noblemen, but if a commoner was exceptionally skilled in fighting in warfare, he would generally become a knight. What did the knights wear in battle? So early knights, meaning before the 1400s, they generally wore chainmail, which was those metal rings, and then steel plates. And underneath that, they would wear the thick leather to kind of protect their skin. Later on, however, after the 1400s, the chainmail was replaced by entirely steel plates covering the knight from head to toe. Why might knights have come primarily from the ranks of the nobles in the Middle Ages? So why were they generally only from noble families? So knights were generally from noble families because they had to make sure they had good weapons, they had good armor, and they were able to take care of it. So most common people didn't have the money or the ability to get those things, and they weren't able to take care of them and keep them good quality. They also had to have a horse, which were very expensive. So very few of them were able to afford all of those things. That's why they generally didn't become a knight. Tournaments and chivalry. Knights had to stay in shape to face the challenges of battle. During peacetime, knights held tournaments. And a tournament is a series of contests among two or more competitors competing for an overall prize. A tournament was a festive time for everyone on the Lord's Manor estate. Colorful banners would blow in the breeze on the tournament grounds. Knights painted colorful designs on the shields and banners to identify themselves and their families. A tournament would often attract knights and guests from surrounding castles. Lords and ladies wore their finest robes as they watched their favorite knights charge toward each other on horseback. The goal of the competition was to use a lance to knock the opposing knight off his horse. This was called jousting. Nobles and serfs alike would bet money on their favorite knight to win the competition. So jousting is a tournament in which two opponents on horseback fight each other with lances. So this picture shows you the striped things are lances that the knights are holding, and they would try to knock the other one off the horse. So why were the tournaments held? So they held these tournaments for jousting, but why were they held? So tournaments were generally held to allow knights to practice their skills for the battlefield. So able to be in a controlled setting, but still practice the stuff they needed to use in actual battle. Men of honor. From time to time, knights became a problem for their lords. After all, they were armed men who were trained to settle arguments violently with their swords. Even though they were the Lord's vassals and their job was to protect the Lord from enemies, there were times that the lords felt threatened by their own knights. To control the knights and their potentially dangerous behavior, lords created a set of rules that knights should follow. These rules were called the Code of Chivalry. Knights were supposed to be generous, courteous, loyal, and honorable. So the Code of Chivalry, again, is just a set of rules for the behavior for knights. The Code of Chivalry required knights to follow certain rules for fighting. For instance, if a knight surrendered, he couldn't try to escape. He had to fight fairly. He could not cheat. Chivalry also required knights to be kind and thoughtful to women. Part of the code called for knights to show loyalty to the lady they served. Sometimes a knight who fought in the tournament would tie his lady's scarf to his helmet to show that he was fighting on her behalf. People loved to hear romantic stories about the adventures of knights and their ladies. Troubadours or minstrels wrote long songs about knights and ladies. Minstrels traveled about singing and performing these songs for those who would pay to listen. So a troubadour is a person who writes and performs poetry set to music. Mounted soldiers. What happened to knights? Medieval knights, as we think of them, slowly disappeared, but mounted soldiers did not. Mounted soldiers are still needed in battle. They could lead a charge or launch a surprise attack. Their horse riding skills and ability to use a range of weapons meant that they were essential on the battlefield. In the end, mounted soldiers, although no longer noble knights, bound to a code of chivalry, remained a key part of warfare for hundreds of years more. So what was the Code of Chivalry and what were its benefits for the people in the Middle Ages? So what was the Code of Chivalry and how did it benefit the people in the Middle Ages? So if you said that the Code of Chivalry was a set of rules and expected behavior for knights to follow, you are correct. And if you also said that these rules help protect people, including the lords, from violence at the knights of the hands, and it gave the lords more control of their knights, and it also improved the public image of the knights, you are also correct. What important role did troubadours play in medieval society? So not the fact that they just played songs, but how did it help the people in the society? So troubadours served as entertainers, but they also fulfilled an important role of spreading stories of romance and adventure around Europe. So they played the songs, but it also kept people entertained by hearing the different stories.